Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our event on rehabilitation and reintegration of women and children repatriated from Syria and Iraq. This event is co-sponsored by the Permanent Mission of Uzbekistan, the Bulan Institute, and the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism. Thank you all for joining. And before going, I would just like to remind everybody that this event has been recorded initially for internal purposes. And as we move on with the event, I'll continue the logistic explanations. I now welcome His Excellency Mr. Ulugbek Lapasov, Permanent Representative of Uzbekistan, to give the opening remarks. Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's an honor and privilege for me to welcome all of you on today's event. I would like to start my speech with saying our co-organizers, that's mean Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the UN Special Report on the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism, and Bulan Institute for Peace Innovation, as well as ICRC for speaking as panelists. As I understood, unfortunately, Ms. Orozbekova of Bulan Institute could not join us today due to health issues. I wish her to get well soon. The topic of our meeting is repatriation of citizens of Uzbekistan from the conflict zones. Many countries attach great importance to these issues. As such, since 2019, the authorities carried out 5 operations that brought back home a total of over 530 people, mainly women and children. This work has not been suspended, even during pandemic. The last of those operations was carried out at the end of April of this year. Most of those women left their home at the call of their spouse who embarked on the path of the terrorism. They lost their husbands in battles, became widows, and their children became orphans. Among those who were brought home, there are several orphans who have lost both their parents. The saddest thing is that these compatriots of ours, faced with a better fate, were forced to live in harmful living conditions. The return operation organized with the support of international partners are in line with the Constitution of Uzbekistan that guarantees that every citizen is under the protection of the state. And it's worth to mention that they are being carried out under the direct leadership of the head of our state, His Excellency Mr. Shavkat Mirziyoyev. We are convinced that repatriation shall not end at the airport. The gradual reintegration of these people into ordinary, peaceful life is also important. In fact, in Uzbekistan, each return is provided with a roof over his head, undergoes vocational training, and is assisted in finding a decent job. This, in our opinion, contributes to their smooth integration to our society. As a result, majority of children are enjoying school education. Many women have found jobs and are employed. Thanks to all efforts, people who were surviving in hopelessness and fear for their lives will now live by faith in tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, our today's speakers will tell us all about in more details. I wish you of us good discussions. I thank you for attention.
Thank you very much, Excellency. We will now pass on to open our panel. And the first one in the panel is Professor Fionnuala Ni Alain, Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism. Special Rapporteur, you have the floor.
Thank you, colleagues. And I'm really, really delighted to be here this morning, this afternoon, or this evening. I know we have people joining us from many parts of the globe. Excellencies, it's my particular pleasure today to really focus on the challenges as well as the good practices we're seeing in the thorny and complex matter of returnees, particularly women and children from Syria in Iraq. And I'm particularly pleased that we have the opportunity to co-sponsor this event with the government of Uzbekistan to deepen our ongoing cooperation with the government and also with the Bulan Institute, with whom we have had a long-standing cooperation on many of these issues. I'd like to give a little bit of background, if I can, on the work that the Special Rapporteur's mandate has been doing on the issue of repatriation, and then turn to some of the, I think, good practices we're seeing, as well as some of the ongoing challenges that we face. As many of you may already know, this mandate has already issued a number of statements concerning repatriation, notably at a joint high-level conference involving the OSCE, UNOCT, and Switzerland in February 2020. We affirmed the importance and the necessity of repatriation and reintegration. We've issued joint statements with the United Nations Special Representative of the Secretary General on sexual violence and conflict, with children in armed conflict, and the Special Representative of the Secretary General on violence against children, addressing again the absolute critical nature of return, particularly for children. We have been involved in a number of amicus briefs, notably at the European Court of Human Rights, as well as in a number of national proceedings. An example of that is the Shamima Begum proceedings at the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. I think for the mandate, one of the most important pieces of the work we're doing at the moment is this direct engagement with government on the issues of repatriation of children. As some of you will already know, in Kazakhstan, my team and I, during our country visit in May 2019, we really had the opportunity, a really unique opportunity, to see firsthand the repatriation measures that the government was taking to bring back several hundred women and children. And I think, again, it's important to underscore the scale of repatriation that we're seeing from countries, including from Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and other countries in the region. This is not a drip by drip, child by child approach. This is a scalar response to a problem that requires a scalar and imaginative solution. I want to also acknowledge the very close cooperation we've had with several governments, including the Russian Federation, where we're starting really now, I think, to move beyond, as I think the ambassador so beautifully said, the question of not just looking at getting people to the airport, but really understanding and engaging with governments about what happens after they arrive at the airport. So in this context, this conversation with the government of Uzbekistan is really deeply affirming, as well as our ongoing discussions about a country visit and the potential that we will be working with Special Rapporteur Ahmed Shahid later this year on the issues of integration in PCVE training. I think, as you know, we've also been involved in many individual cases from Canada to Ireland. These are often singular cases, encouraging governments to take home mostly children and occasionally women. We've pointed out one of the most significant departures by this mandate has been to issue a letter to 57 governments, all of those governments who hold third country nationals in the camps, many of whom, regrettably, unlike the government of Uzbekistan, are not bringing back their nationals. And so we have pleaded with those governments that their international law and human rights obligations demand repatriation, but we would also make the very clear case that security demands repatriation. The long-term security interests of states will not be well served by leaving their nationals in northeast Syria. That problem will only fester and become more difficult to manage in the long term. So far-sighted governments, like the government of Uzbekistan, that is making decisions to bring people home now, to engage in repatriation and reintegration early on, particularly with children, is really extraordinarily important. So let me say a little bit more about this idea of the importance, the absolute critical importance of return. We've been very clear that the urgent return and repatriation of foreign fighters and their families, and most particularly children from these conflict zones, is the only international law compliant response to this complex and ever precarious human rights, humanitarian, and security situation. We know that the conditions in the camps are worsening. We know that the condition in the region is worsening. And my view remains that repatriation and return is the only comprehensive response that amounts to the positive implementation of UN Security Council resolutions 2178 of 2014 and 2396 of 2017. And again, I continue to stress the significance of repatriation and return and reintegration for the state's long-term security interests. We're also clear, and this is where I think the openness and transparency of the governments of Uzbekistan is so important, is we're also clear that human rights compliant return is the only meaningful and long-term effective return that we can have. And I'm really pleased to applaud the work of the government of Uzbekistan in bringing back their nationals, recognizing how challenging and complex the return is. No one is suggesting that this is a simple matter, but what it does require is it requires a commitment to action. And it requires, again, as the government, as the ambassador has said, the importance of recognizing under domestic law, under the constitution, the rights of individuals who are found overseas and the activation of those rights by repatriation and return. We see here a due diligence, and we see positive steps and effective measures to protect the most vulnerable individuals who are located outside the territory. And that's particularly important for children who are at serious risk of human rights violations and abuses. So let me just briefly say a few words about some of the key human rights challenges and issues that we still see. And I want to particularly focus in our discussion on children's. What I have underscored in a number of my communications and public statements is that in this context of particularly the detention in northeast Syria, in camps, that these conditions of detention meet the threshold for torture, inhuman, and degrading treatment under international law. The children who are deprived of their liberty in these camps are victimized on multiple grounds, and they continue to be denied the protection to which they are entitled. We are seeing, I think, as the government of Uzbekistan saw when it brought back children, that many of these children had severe issues of trauma. They had enormous gaps in their education, in their health. These children are not safe from the elements. There's a lack of safe water. There's a lack of adequate sanitation, a lack of adequate medical services, a lack of education, and more than that, as we've seen in security reports from the camp, a vulnerability to violence, exploitation, including sexual and other forms of abuse. So all of this requires action. More than that, we would say, and again, it's important that we treat particularly the children in the camps as victims of terrorism. They are not responsible for the acts of their parents who brought them there. They are not responsible for the virtue of where they were born, but they should not have to carry the terrible burden of simply having been born to individuals who are related to or associated with designated terrorist groups. And our response to those groups shouldn't be to lower the level of protection for children simply because their parents or their family had an association with or related to these groups. I think I have really serious concern. One of the things of the patterns that we've been seeing, and again, I want to commend repatriation, which brings mothers and children home together, because that's the best way of ensuring that children will be fully reintegrated, is the pattern of separation, the kind of pick and choose menu that we see certain governments choosing to bring home children, but to leave mothers behind. And again, the long-term human rights and security implications of that, we think, are severe. I want to acknowledge again Uzbekistan's work in its focus on children, on its close cooperation with UNICEF, its willing to be transparent about the work being done with children, and an openness to assessment about what's working and what is not. We know that many countries are learning as they go in this process. And it's really important that when states are engaged in the scale of repatriation that we see in a country like Uzbekistan, that what we see is a willingness to open up to UN entities and to engage the full array of human rights supports available for us to support governments to do this work that they are doing. Let me close by just saying a couple of words about a recent position paper the mandate issues on boys and adolescents. I've noted that a lot of the time when we talk about women and children in Northeast Syria and Iraq, we tend to assume that the children are girls, and we forget that there are large numbers of young boys found in this situation. I've been particularly concerned about the health and the safety of young boys and adolescents in the camp. I want to just focus on some key messages. I think that boys and young adolescent men are in a particularly vulnerable situation, subject to unique harms. And these are gendered harms, precisely because of the assumptions being made about their gender, because they're male, their parentage, their presumed affiliations, and the geography, Syria and Iraq. And more than that, their religious belief as Muslims. I am profoundly concerned about the number of young boys who are being held in detention-like facilities, who are being treated in situations that are absolutely abhorrent. No bedding provisioned, unmanaged overcrowding, no access to sunlight, insufficient latrine access, and virtually no water or shower access. Malnutrition is rife. Boys in these facilities are suffering from a range of avoidable diseases, HIV, tuberculosis, and of course today's COVID-19 exposure. I want to remind us that when we talk about children, we need to include boys in the conversation. We need to be mindful that what we're seeing, the separation, the culling, and the warehousing of adolescent boys from their mothers is an abhorrent practice inconsistent with the dignity of the child. So let me close by just affirming the political will and courage of states like Uzbekistan who are bringing their nationals home. I think the political discourse, the kinds of language we hear from the ambassador today underscores the kind of discourse we need from all governments to ensure that repatriation will happen effectively, not the vilification or the kind of extremist language that tends to suggest that this is not possible at all, but a language that's open, a language that speaks to human rights, and a language that allows us all, by the example that we're seeing, to actually solve this extraordinary, dire political and humanitarian situation that we face in Northeast Syria. So the mandate is very pleased to be a part of this conversation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Special Rapporteur. Thanks for those remarks. And now I will invite His Excellency Dr. Akmal Saidov, First Deputy Speaker of Legislative Chamber of Parliament and Director of the National Human Rights Centers of Uzbekistan. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Dear Madam Special Rapporteur Fionnuala Ni Alain, dear Mr. Doin, I want to thank many thanks to Madam Urazbekova, the director of the Bulan Institute for Peace Innovation, for his support during the organize this event. Dear colleagues, I would like to welcome you here today. Let me thank you all for our participation on this event today. Within the framework of the human policy implemented by the government of Uzbekistan, 5 special operations were implemented in the last 3 years to withdraw Uzbek citizens from Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. So in May 2019, a special operation conditional name Maker 1 or Mercy 1 was carried out within the framework of the state program Mercy, according to the repatriation of 156 citizens of Uzbekistan. 107 of them are minors. In December 2020, an operation was carried out, the conditional name Mercy 2, to repatriate 98 citizens, 73 of them are minors who were held in the Al-Hol camp located in Syria and expressed a desire to return to Uzbekistan. As part of previously conducted operations Mercy 1, 2, 3, 4, 438 women and children who were helpless in a difficult situation were returned to Uzbekistan from Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. On February 8, 2021, the United Nations Human Rights Council experts published a press release. Syria UN experts called on 57 states to repatriate women and children from scheduled camps, which expressed serious concern about the deterioration of the security and humanitarian situation in the Al-Hol and Roch camps in northeast Syria, where more than 64,000 people, mostly women and children, live in prison of 57 states whose citizens are held in these camps. In this regard, in response to the joint appeal of the Special Rapporteur of the UN Human Rights Council on the information they received concerning Uzbek citizens deprived of their liberty staying in the Al-Hol and Roch camps in Syria, as well as the call of United Nations human rights experts for the repatriation of women and children from camps in northeastern Syria, the government of Uzbekistan, on behalf of and under the direct leadership of the president of Uzbekistan, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, conducted a humanitarian operation Mercy 5 on April 30, 2021, within the framework of which 24 women and 69 children were returned to Uzbekistan by the special board of the Uzbekistan Airways. The humanitarian operation was carried out with the support of the United States and other partner countries. In the process of returning citizens to their homeland and further adaptation measures, no facts of infringement of their rights and freedoms were allowed. The desire of repatriates to return to their homeland was also facilitated by constant wandering and starvation, the fear of losing children and loved ones, the lack of qualified medical care, and zones which sometimes caused the death of their young children. Dear colleagues, in order to rehabilitate the repatriates, the government of Uzbekistan has created working groups that are entrusted with the tasks of rehabilitation, restoration of documents, employment, placement in school and preschool institutions, determination of guardians for orphans or their placement in state social institutions, monitoring of health and psychological condition. The repatriates underwent rehabilitation in 2 stages. The first stage, as part of the initial adaptation work for repatriates, organized for up to 1 month in the Boston Sanatorium of the Tashkent region. Medical examinations and medical procedures were carried out. Measures were taken to restore identity documents, as well as to issue birth certificates to children born in the Syrian-Iraq zone within the framework of current legislation. In the absence of information about the citizenship of the parents, the citizenship of minor children was determined in accordance with international legal norms. The assessment of the mental and moral state of the repatriates was carried out. Interviews, trainings, and studies were conducted by qualified teachers, psychologists, and theologians from non-governmental organizations who already had experience working with radicals and difficult children. Teachers assessed the level of knowledge of children for drawing up individual training programs. In addition, surgical operations were performed for needy repatriates. Children whose parents were killed in Syria and Iraq have been assigned guardians from among family ties. Upon completion of rehabilitation measures, the repatriates were escorted to places of permanent residence, where, with the coordination of state bodies and public institutions, a set of measures for their social adaptation and inclusion in society was organized. The second stage, as part of the secondary adaptation period, measures have been organized at the places of permanent residence of repatriates to attract them to an active social life, including the restoration of the social contacts in the local communities, as well as assistance in finding employment or continuing education. In some cases, the repatriates were sent to courses for obtaining specialties. Psychologists and other specialists have organized work with relative to provide a positive preventive effect on repatriated citizens in family conditions. The moral support of close relatives and friends turned out to be a key factor in the successful resocialization of repatriates. Preferential mortgage loans for the purchase of apartments were issued to the repatriates at their place of residence. Apartments were rented to some of them from the regional hakimiyats. Residential premises were repaired. Conditions for doing business were created. Household appeals were issued, etc. The children of the repatriates are placed in educational institutions. In order to actively socialize, the repatriates educate them in the spirit of universal norms and national values. Representatives of Muslim clergy were involved at various stages of the rehabilitation process. They conducted individual interviews with the returned persons to explain the fallacy of extremist and terrorist ideas, the true goals of Islam. It should be noted that the monitoring of changes in the religious views and worldview of the separatists showed that the overwhelming majority completely abandoned extremist ideas. As a result of the measures taken, most of the repatriates completely abandoned extremist ideas and began to lead a secular lifestyle. In general, the program implemented by the leadership of Uzbekistan in relation to our citizens is aimed at ensuring the safe repatriation of compatriots, despite the commission of serious and especially serious crimes by them or their family members. At the same time, this program can serve as an example for many countries whose citizens are still in refugee camps in Syria, in Iraq, and also accepted as an exemplary work in the field of ensuring human rights. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for those remarks. I think in our program, we had as next speaker, Ms. Orosovekova, Director of the Bulan Institute, who unfortunately cannot be with us today, but we will circulate her statement in the chat box. And if you're not able to open the document, we're happy to circulate at the later stage. I now welcome Mr. Guilherme Doin, Advisor on Protection Global Affairs of the International Committee of the Red Cross. Guilherme, please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. First of all, we would like to thank the government of Uzbekistan and the mandate of the Special Rapporteur for organizing this important event today. In Syria and in Iraq, ICRC has been developing its humanitarian, neutral and independent work, aiming as usual to assist and protect persons that are affected by armed conflict and other situations of violence. Our humanitarian activities for the population in camps and prisons in northeast Syria, amongst them for people targeting people of foreign origin, includes not only the provision of basic services such as health, food, water and habitat, but also tracing of those who have been separated during the conflict. At this point, together with the Red Crosses and Red Crescent societies throughout the world, the ICRC developed a program to support the reestablishment of family links through the exchange of Red Cross messages between family members in country of origins and those foreigners that are still held in areas of conflict. Those are very old Red Cross messages from even the previous wars. We're still using them, and we're still using in this file. Considering the dire humanitarian needs identified, especially in the camps in northeast Syria, affecting in particular women and children, the ICRC has been advocating for states and parties to the conflict, not only to address life-saving needs of these populations, but also to work together to address the root causes of the issue. Repatriation of foreign nationals appears, therefore, as the overall solution when conducted in accordance with international law, including the respect for the principle of non-refoulement. Durable and principled solutions are also needed to address the situation in Syria of Syrian and Iraqi nationals currently present in the region. These populations, for sure, they cannot be forgotten. After repatriation, the ICRC has been assisting a number of states in addressing the needs of returnees, especially to address the mental health and psychosocial needs of this population. Even after repatriation, ICRC also extends its humanitarian services to continue visiting returnees, and whenever needed, offering its reestablishment of family link services to this population, in particular to those who have been repatriated and who have left behind family members in areas of conflict. Building upon our experience, I'd like to share with you our humble lessons learned in this file, especially in the countries where we've been supporting returnees. The first one, and as mentioned by the Professor Fionnuala, states should ensure that families are not separated, and in particular, that siblings are kept together in respect of the principle of family unity. There may be children in northeast Syria and Iraq who are in detention, and they must not be left behind. All decisions regarding the fate of these children should be taken in respect of the principle of their best interest. Interinstitutional coordination, and the words of His Excellency, the ambassador today made it clear with the working groups that he was mentioning. Interinstitutional coordination is one of the biggest steps for states to prepare the ground and implement reintegration policies for returnees that is able to address a lot of their needs, because their needs are from different natures, as you know. Any decision taken with regard to the fate of these returnees should be, and we stress this a lot, based on an individualized assessment of each case and in accordance with the law. Returned children, as also mentioned by Professor Fionnuala, regardless of their age, should be treated first and foremost as victims. When advocating for repatriation, ICRC does not advocate for impunity. It reminds states that all those who are accused of committing crimes while in areas of conflict should be brought to justice. In doing so, the basic rights of returned adults that are placed in detention should also be respected, including the right to a fair trial. States are also reminded to consider the special situation of young adults who were actually brought to the areas of conflict while they were still children. Preparing the receiving communities and working with local organizations is another important aspect of the reintegration process. Receiving families should not be forgotten, and state authorities and local organizations can support these families to better receive their own loved ones who have experienced traumatic events and are likely to have specific needs in the months and years following the return. The loss of contact, again, of their loved ones and the pain caused by the family members who have gone missing in battle or in the areas of conflict is one of the main sources of stress that we have identified amongst returnees. The ICRC recommends that states take all the necessary steps so that returnees can maintain contact with their family members who remained in areas of conflict, in particular in Syria and in Iraq. Returnees' health should be for sure a priority. In particular, the mental health of children and adult returnees need to be addressed as a priority. In doing so, state authorities can ensure that medical and psychosocial personnel are able to conduct their activities in line with medical ethics and in respect of the principle of confidentiality. Mental health consequences of war may compromise the chances of returnees to readapt successfully to the country of origin. Mental health interventions with a focus on alleviating emotional suffering, which these people, as we know, have witnessed a lot, may allow returnees an important resource to start a new life. Many of those returnees from conflict areas have lost the personal documents, and His Excellency was also mentioning this point before, and many children have actually been born in areas of conflict. And we've been noticing a big need for birth certificates and identity documents, addressing these administrative issues for both children, but also adults. And we should not forget them, including sometimes they might need declarations of absence or the provision of death certificates in accordance with the law. Is one of the first steps to ensure returnees to enjoy the basic rights within society, including social benefits that are available to the community in the country of origin. Children must benefit from individualized education planning and with all necessary material and resources, as access to education is one of the ways of ensuring a stabilizing environment with a routine for a child, and equally providing some hope for a more positive future. Access to state assistance should be extended without discrimination, regardless of whether the families have returned from conflict areas by their own means, or they have been returned through a repatriation process by the government. Finally, it is important to stress here that ICRC is a neutral and independent humanitarian organization when we work with the file of returnees. We do not partake in states' policies aiming to prevent and counter violent extremism, including de-radicalization. However, we continue to offer all states our support in addressing the humanitarian needs of these returnees, in line with the recommendations that I've just shared. We hope that the practices and lessons learned shared today will support the creation of a spirit of international cooperation and continue to inspire the design and the implementation of policies that balance the legitimate security concerns and respond to the broad range of the humanitarian needs of these individuals. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Guilherme. I thank all our panelists for their interventions, the practices they have put forward, and those important remarks that you have made. I now invite all our participants to take the floor. We're going to have a question and answers section right now, short discussion. We have the request from Almazbek Beishenaliev, please.
I'm Almazbek Beishenaliev. I'm a permanent representative to the United Nations from Kyrgyz Republic. So first of all, I would like to thank all organizers and His Excellency Ulugbek Lapasov for this meaningful and important event. In 16th of March this year, Kyrgyzstan also repatriated 79 children from Iraq. Now we are trying to bring back those kind of children from Syria also. At that time, I was working as a minister for education and science in Kyrgyzstan. So I was in the process to one of the responsible person to manage to take care of their accommodation, rehabilitation, and reintegration process. So we have many supports from international organizations, governmental organizations, and non-governmental organizations. Especially, I'd like to thank UNICEF and Red Cross. So our president himself, His Excellency Sadr Japarov, visited that dormitory where these kids were staying and controlling himself this process. So I have two questions for our friends, for panelists. First of all, as we see, the education process is very important in this case. How Uzbekistan is managing those children to bring back to education process or readaptation, what kind of difficulties they had, because as educator background, I would like to focus on that topic. And secondly, I have also one topic. Uzbekistan had a great job. So I think they need to share this experience to entire the Central Asia region, because now our country is also trying to bring back those kind of children. So what kind of work doing Uzbekistan's government to share this success story or ongoing success story to share entire Central Asia region? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. With this, we also have an additional question from the floor from Ms. Marina Mikhail from the Peace for Development and Human Rights. And her question is, what are the best international practices in dealing with returnees from children and women, and how civil society can help in the process of rehabilitation and reintegration of women and children? I think with these questions and the comments from our previous participants, may I ask Dr. Akmal Saidov just to respond to these questions, and then any other of the panelists that may wish to take the floor. Dr. Saidov, please.
Thank you, moderator. I thank every speaker today for their addresses and all who contributed to the discussions. I especially thank to Ambassador Hassan Said and also Ambassador Sri Lanka. Thanks to all speakers, and many thanks Ambassador of Kyrgyz Republic, Almazbek Beishenaliev, for his participation, for his questions. I believe that with such dialogue, we can improve our efforts and addressing challenges related to return of citizens from conflict zones, and to see where we have bottlenecks to work on. Madam Special Rapporteur rightly mentioned that boys may face some discrimination based on their sex. And I assure you all that all repatriated children in Uzbekistan, regardless their gender, are treated equally and in the best interest of a child, according to with the Convention of the Rights of Children. And I see it's very important, and the questions of Ambassador Kyrgyz, it's very interesting. We do all conditions for the come back to our child's to education. Education is the main job of each children. And I think it's very important. Each country has his own experience. And Uzbek side are ready to disseminate our experience for repatriated and for the prevent and protection the rights of preventive citizens. And thanks. And I think about the question of Medina. I think the international expert is very interesting question, and I think Uzbekistan also have his experience. Maybe the special rapporteur maybe answer this question. At the end, I want especially thanks personally UN Special Rapporteur on Fionnuala Ni Alain, the director of the Bulan Institute for Peace Innovations to Children, Ms. Doin, Advisor Protection, Global Affairs, ICRC, and all the, I see it's very interesting. And I thank personally Michelle for your excellent moderating our meeting. Thank you all participants for joining us today.
Thank you, Dr. Saidov, Professor Saidov. Special Rapporteur.
Yes, no, and my thanks to all the panelists for such informative and detailed analysis. And I'm particularly struck by the micro, that we're focusing not just on the macro of the sort of importance of bringing back, but also the very specificity of how we do what we do and what we learn along the way. Let me just make a couple of comments to some of the remarks made from the floor, and my thanks to all those who joined us today. The first is just on the concept of, assessing the risks, if that's of persons who are returning. I think the mandate has been very clear, as has been other entities, UN entities, that here we need individual risk assessment, and that is absolutely critical. And the point is that when we lump a group as risk without disaggregating who's in the group, how they ended up in the camps, what the conditions in which they find themselves in are. And I think this is particularly compelling. This question of individual assessment is particularly compelling for women and children. The mandate has been very clear that in many contexts, what we have seen, particularly for women traveling, and I think the ambassador's remarks were really prescient in this regard, was we've seen really instances of online grooming, we've seen instances of trafficking, we've seen instances of really poor decision-making, often by very young people, influenced by their access to information or pressure from others. And as we do in national legal systems, when we focus on a model of rehabilitation, human rights-based model of rehabilitation, we assess all of those things in a way that ensures that we bring a human rights-based approach to assessing risk, but that also that human rights-based approach is in the interest of security. Those two things are not separate. They are deeply and profoundly connected together. And the second comment I would make, and I thank the ambassador from Sri Lanka from his remarks on the floor, is that I think one of the things that we have to remember, and I say this as someone who came from a society that experienced conflict, Northern Ireland, for many years, is that we have decades of experience of doing demobilization, reintegration of individuals through DDR programs across the UN system. And it's always struck me as really odd that in the context of the conflict in Syria, it's like we forgot that we had 40 decades of experience of dealing with complex conflicts with really challenging groups and individuals and cross-border pieces to manage. None of this is per se new. And so one of the things I really encourage, and I'm really glad that we have the ICRC with us on the panel, is actually that we have a collective memory as well as practical knowledge of programs that have been human rights compliant, focused on the implementation of international humanitarian law, ensuring that that is done appropriately, and that we shouldn't actually forget in the context of this conflict, these conflicts, that all of those resources and practices remain available to us. We are not starting from zero. And maybe finally, I want to concur with both the question and the comments about education. One of the mandate's observations when we were in Kazakhstan and we had the opportunity to see returnees and children really days after they arrived, one of the first things that struck me personally was actually almost immediately children were being put back into a school-like structure. That the acknowledgement was, first of all, that children needed structure, but also that education, critical thinking, the engagement with learning was going to be an absolutely essential part of a child's best interest, as well as ensuring a child's capacity to rehabilitate. And I see, and many of us know, that many of these children have lost large sort of slices of their education, and we have enormous ground to make up with them. And so to state the very obvious, as we're seeing in countries engaging in repatriation, education will be critical on so many markers to ensuring that we have successful reintegration and the successful reaffirmation of the dignity of the child and also of some of the adults who were children when they went to Syria and Iraq. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Guilherme, would you have any any remarks on this point before moving on to Professor Saidov?
No, maybe just one point, echoing the words of Professor Fionnuala and His Excellency Ambassador. Indeed, there's a need for an individualized assessment, as we mentioned before, and this is key, and in accordance with the law. So there's a need to respect the law and not to make an exception speech about the working with this population. There's just one point more I would like to add on the education. Actually, it's twofold. So first, the need for the interinstitutional cooperation here is important. And from the get-go, from the beginning, where countries are trying to do this, to repatriate and to do a reintegration process, education authorities should be involved in the design of how they are going to be received. And as much as possible, children should be analyzed a little bit in an individualized manner as well, to have some sort of individual plan of studies. Because often they might not even speak the language of the country that they are returning to. So there's a need to take care of these minimum things that may impact in the whole process of reintegration. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Guilherme. Professor Saidov, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I want to quickly react to Kyrgyz ambassador questions. First of all, I fully agree with Fionnuala Ni Alain and Doin on education of minors. Of course, those children will face difficulties to join a regular school due to task-based education. In this regard, we provide special course for all those children, and we plan to someday in near future, they will be able to integrate to normal school institutions. The firstly. The second, we are well aware that Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan has repatriated their citizens. Uzbekistan stands ready to work together with all our neighbors. And we will be more than happy not only to share our experience, but to learn best practices from every country. Thank you for your attention.
Oh, I see none. One of us, maybe our panelist, Guilherme, would you like to do some remarks on comments? In particular, I think there was a question earlier on the best international practices dealing with returns, if you can comment on this particular point.
I think the answers of my predecessor, they laid out a little bit what I'm going to say. There are, for the moment, no international recognized best practices. And that's why we welcome so much the openness of the countries to share their experiences and the need to continue to do so, which we actually witnessed today here through the statement of His Excellency Ambassador Akmal Saidov. So it's, I think this is something that is being built and should continue to be built in the spirit of international cooperation. I would just like maybe to call the attention for another point that is important when we talk about reintegration, is taking care of those who are taking care. And especially taking care of the professionals that are assigned to take care of the mental and social needs of these children and of the women, and the importance that they also are offered with the tools to be able to do this job properly, that a job that might be as well frustrating, a job that might have several issues. So it's important that in the design of these policies, the needs of these professionals are considered. That's why as well as ICRC in our mental health and psychosocial programs, this is one of the aspects that we tackle with the states. That's it. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you very much, Guilherme. I think at this point we have no longer questions from the floor, and unless anybody else wants to had an opportunity to have a question or to make a specific remark, maybe I ask the special rapporteur to give a few concluding remarks. And thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I just want to acknowledge the work of the mandates support, Michelle, a human rights officer, supporting us on our intern to get us all online today. So thanks to them. But I most particularly want to thank the government of Uzbekistan. I think this kind of dialogue is indispensable to the kind of scale of the challenge that we're facing in Northeast Syria and Iraq. And there are few governments willing to have this open and transparent discussion about what they are doing nationally. And I think it's important that we commend and affirm the work that you're doing and also continue to support you in that work. And I want to acknowledge that the mandate will continue to engage with governments, with the UN Secretariat, with agencies, and with civil society on this issue so that we can all have a greater understanding of the challenges that we're facing. We all know that what we need is a durable human rights compliant solution for all of the individuals currently deprived of their liberty in Northeast Syria, Iraq, and elsewhere. And this is not a problem that is going away. We know that this is a problem that continues to pose massive lines of instability and insecurity, as well as creating long-term vulnerabilities for individuals and potentially perpetuating the cycle of violence that continues to fuel conflict and extremist violence. And so the solutions to this problem are key. And we hope that we can continue to work not only with the government of Uzbekistan, but all of the countries in the region in the work that they are doing and find durable, long-term human rights compliant solutions, rule of law compliant solutions to the scale of the challenges we face. So thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Fionnuala. Ambassador, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Only for a few minutes. I would like to thank again the organizer and Michelle, especially for you, for wonderful moderating our events today. Special report, as I said, we discussed with you, we've been waiting for you with a country visit to Uzbekistan. As you rightly mentioned, a good experience of Kazakhstan in this field. Maybe it will be also interesting to see what's going on in Uzbekistan in place to discuss with the relevant stakeholders and to see, and we will wait from you also some suggestions, proposals with regard to improve the situation in this field. Special thanks to Mr. Doin. Also, we have the good relations with the ICRC, and I think it's a good process started several years ago. Let's say we are reanimate our cooperation with the ICRC, and we strongly believe that we have a lot to do together, not only in the framework of rehabilitation or integration of women and children repatriated of Syrian conflict zone, but we have the huge agenda and covering range of questions. And especially, unfortunately, as I said, Ms. Orazbekova, she's absent right now, and we will discuss, hopefully in a few days, we'll resume, and maybe we will plan another meeting as proposed by His Excellency Professor Saidov for the future, for our future side event in the framework of not only HRC, maybe other events here in Geneva, to share our experience as rightly proposed by Kyrgyz ambassador here in Geneva, and not only in Geneva, maybe in other places like in New York, in Tashkent. We are still ready here, permanent missions, to work with all international partners, including UN agencies, Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, in this subject. As it was this, let's say, good opportunity to exchange of views, to see good experience from different countries, including, even for me, it was very interesting to hear about my Sri Lankan ambassador, my colleague, what's going on in Sri Lanka and efforts of the government of Sri Lanka in this field. Once again, thank you very much, dear colleagues. Hopefully, once pandemic it will be regulated in the near future, wishing you to see all of participants of this meeting in Uzbekistan one day, in offline meetings, for side event, let's say one day, for side events on rehabilitation and reintegration of women and children repatriated from Syria and Iraq in Uzbekistan, maybe next year in Uzbekistan. Huh? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for those kind words and invitation. Thank you very much to all our dear panelists and to the participants for their questions, for their comments, and we look forward to see you all in our next event.